This text is based on the science of pain, posture, and performance, and represents a 2-year search, a very comprehensive search at doctoral level on how the skill of riding combines with the safeguarding of both horse and rider spinal functional health. So I have a bachelor's degree in sports therapy I graduated around the year 2000. So I'm no stranger to this topic. And this book is unique because every technique contains a link to a short demonstration of how to perform the move as it was intended. And there are some 50 video links in the book just to make the process easier. So there's an online flip book, which you'll see on the screen and which I will flip through shortly. But it also comes with a PDF to download as a hard copy. The introduction and background explains how the forces generated by the horse and directed at the rider must be managed by the rider using their posture. And the importance of postural health while riding is also explained. You will get a link to this book, and when you click on it, makes a nice clicky sound or flipping sound, and the book opens. I have included how to use this text. There's also some preparation for what you need to know before you actually use it. So we will just flick through that in a moment, but I've included an explanation on biophysics and the gravitational forces that the rider has to be able to manage and control, because as you know, it's not just a question of just sitting there. And never before seen is a horse and rider needs analysis. This is common in other sports. So for example, a footballer or footballing coach knows what is required physically for that footballer to be able to play the game. So I'm covering the anatomy of equitation and also the stability visualization techniques, because I use those with every ridden session. So as well as correcting the rider rotations, the shoulder, hip, heel stuff, but in 3 dimensions. As well as that, we can use visualization to really boost the feeling that the riders get on the horse. And it's works like magic. Even when I just say to people, okay, let's just imagine you're doing a dance. Well, everything changes. So visualization is a very big part of what I do. I'm also going to be going through some rider weight reduction techniques, and then we'll get on to the postural conditioning techniques. And I've also put in a desk a size dozen. So if you've got no time, you've got no energy, whatever the barriers are, if you're seated at a desk or table, there will be something you can do. And then I've got on several exercise machines, which I consider to be rider specific, so that of all those that I've looked at, these that I've tested here, I consider them to be very good if you're going to make an investment in a machine. And then I've got a whole lot of references for those who want to have a deep geeky dive. So let's go on and see what's here. So basically, the introduction, the most effective techniques are postural corrections, obviously. So you can get away with just the postural corrections and not the exercise, which is great news. But you will get a faster, more effective result if you go for a postural bodywork session. So when I say postural bodywork, number one practitioners for that, I believe, are the osteopaths and chiropractic. So it will pay you to have at least one session with a postural body worker to find out, to evaluate, to assess, and just find out where your weaknesses are. Because riding is really best done when you can stack the body up comfortably, head over shoulders, over rib cage, over pelvis, and over pelvic floor, the bony triangle. More about that shortly. I also say the techniques are not the work of a fitness fanatic, but of myself, a rider who, after 10 years of riding horses regularly, joined the 80% prevalence of riders suffering pain and stiffness. So I've been in rehabilitation for 20 years after it was announced to me by an orthopedic consultant back then that I had the degenerated lumbar spine of a 90-year-old, which was quite shocking, and all the joint restriction that accompanies it. But before the onset of my back problem, like many multiple horse owning riders, taking extended breaks from the strenuous associated daily chores was not an option because horses have to be cared for. But I was lucky because at the time I embarked on a sports science based sports therapy degree at the same time as the diagnosis. So I was very well placed for self-rehabilitation, and I was my own case study. I fully embrace the fact that motivation to exercise is seldom strong in most people. Most people can have a little flurry around January, get the gym membership, but I think because that isn't targeted, it's not individualized, it can be harmful if you've already got a back problem or joint problems. But I wanted to create something that would help you to feel your postural weaknesses and to feel them as part of the techniques. I have found that it's a benefit to have some very inexpensive pieces of equipment that you can pick up on Facebook Marketplace or for very little money. You may even have some, or your friends may have some in their garages that they've abandoned along the way or kept them because they think they're going to pick up on them later. But I recommend the homemade foam roller, but you can use a rolled up towel. So get a big bath towel and roll it up. And I will release the link for that exercise shortly after this presentation. I discovered it and it's the most wonderful zero effort technique for your spine, the musculature holding your spine, your posture. And the stiffer you are, the more endorphin releases you get. So it can be a wonderful experience doing nothing. And the most powerful technique. If I had any technique to recommend in this book, it's that one. I do also recommend a kettlebell. Very easy to get hold of, inexpensive, 4 kilo. If you want to start with 2, you can, but I just think if you're strong enough to ride a horse and you're an adult, then 4 kilos should be enough to give you some muscle activation without wearing you out. A set of wrist and ankle weights, they're really good. I really do recommend those. And a wooden balance board to sit on, and just a simple endurance level resistance band. So nothing too tight. You can use a pair of tights if you want, or it won't be difficult for you to find something that you can use with a little bit of stretch in it. And then I've gone on to describe 12 techniques that if you're really not ready to start yet, or you're waiting for that day when you are ready, good luck. I've got about a dozen techniques there to get you started. So, for example, if you wheel a wheelbarrow full of muck, which many of us do, if you wheel it behind you, you can keep your posture upright, and that will strengthen your back rather than pushing it, leaning over and injuring your back that way. Before you get on, if you perform a brief back massage on your horse, that'll be great to warm the horse's back up, and it will warm you up too. A few tips on how to use this text. What I'm encouraging you to do is study the needs analysis chart. So you should be able to identify what you feel like you need most physical help with to get your posture ready. So you might be able to cut through from 19 of you. You may be able to just select a couple that you need. I mean, if you need them all, that's fine. But start one step at a time. So I said that this book had demonstration videos in it. So what you have to do is hover over the link till it changes color. So don't think that your copy just doesn't do it. It's just that it needs to change color then it will take you straight into a YouTube video if you're online at the time. So if you've got a good signal. So that's if you're online, but don't panic about that, because as I said before, you will get a PDF. In the techniques, I've actually suggested numbers of repetitions, but what I don't want you to do is to say, oh, I have to do 10 of this, 3 of that, 5 of that, and then rest. So I want you to just pace yourself. So I've just given you the minimum number of repetitions, and if you get a conditioning effect, that's great. If you feel like you didn't, or you want more, or you progress through your postural fitness, then add more as necessary. When you're conditioning your posture, it is vital that you focus on spinal stability, and your limbs are strengthened with techniques of, it involves flexion and extension. Sorry, there's money in this, not a bottle of whiskey. So we can flex and extend our arms, biceps, triceps, pectorals, to develop them. You cannot do that with your spine, especially if you're a horse rider, especially if you have that tendency to develop a back problem. So all these exercises protect your spine, all of them. First steps, I just recommend that you get to know how to engage or activate your core stability muscles, so rectus and transverse abdominis. It's pointless doing exercises for riders if you are not able to identify at what point your core stability muscles start working. I had to learn, even though I had very high core strength, I had to learn how to do that. Once I did, my riding just took on a whole new level, even after 10 years, might have been 15 years of riding. So we find where the core stability muscles are, we locate, we activate, we feel, and we also understand how to engage a neutral pelvis, because that will activate the core stability muscles. I'll try a link or two a little bit later. Just some background here about horse riding. It's stability and synchrony which is going to determine whether you can ride competently or not. Obviously, there's techniques of skill to direct the horse in different gaits, but unless you're stable, you cannot synchronize. And unless you're stable and synchronized, the horse is not going to perform at its best. And I've also got sections here and there of nerd notes, because it is important to understand that there is an evidence base. You should exercise from an evidence base, just so that you can be sure that the activities that you're doing, the exercises, have been through a process of quality control. So then we have some lovely pictures. I've taken screenshots of horses in rising trot, sitting trot, canter, jump. I just want you to see there how much the pelvis is involved in the technique, the skill, the competence of riding. So you must have control of it. It must be stable. And as you can see, these riders are synchronized. If they weren't, they'd probably be shot off the horses' backs. These pictures of the pelvis, just to remind you, the pelvis is not just something to be viewed from the side, as in shoulder, hip, heel, moving backwards and forwards or front to back. There's also the tilt, looking from behind, up and down, and then there's the rotation, and you have to control all of that. And one thing that I discovered with my horse simulator and the riders using it is that it's very difficult for riders to control the back front movement and the side to side movement at the same time. Very difficult. So this is why you need to have natural core stability of being able to control back and front, so that you know exactly how vertical you need to be, so that you can then start thinking about the seat bone, pubic bone contact, and how you are left to right. And also the horse will move you left to right. So you need to be able to go with that, but stay vertical. Keep the faith. I have some great exercises for that. Again, more nerd notes. This is just about the force control of the gravity. So that a rider is a pendulum, but so is the horse. So the rider makes a pendulum with their upper body, whereas the horse makes a pendulum with their four limbs. So they move their body with the four limbs. So the limbs are the pendulum. That's difficult to organise. I've also got keynotes in there so that you can just pay attention when an important bit comes up. So then we go on to the rider needs analysis, and I've only got a couple of needs for the horse, and that is that it should have wither lift, which I keep trying to beat into everybody on the internet, which will give it back function, back mobility. But it shouldn't be that when you put a rider and saddle on the horse, it shouldn't be that they block that movement. So that's a very big part of this program, is just checking that the horse is moving well. Again, they might need a therapist at the same time as you do to check the posture, but I have included a film there so that you can look at that, so you can check your horse's starting point. So these are the needs: whole body symmetry, core stability, hip flexor extensor tonal control for a synchronous independent seat. So you need mobile hip joints, in other words, the neutral pelvis. You need lumbopelvic control and mobility. It's helpful to have a kneeling standing posture, control of the pelvic floor, contact. You should be able to maintain that with the saddle. Shoulder joint stability, hip joint mobility, as I just said. That's not a duplication, by the way. It's just linked with lumbopelvic mobility. And the knee and ankle are important, so we work those as well. You need to have developed erector spinae musculature, and that is to buffer the forces that are directed to your spine. So we're going to have some back muscle building for that. Gluteal tonal control, again, that will absorb some of the movement. The horse puts the rider in momentum, and that momentum is taken up by the spine, or by the seat, by the spine. So I'm very concerned that the spine has protection here. And of course, cardiovascular fitness. So that is obviously important. It depends if your horse is fitter than you, because obviously some will need more cardiovascular fitness than others. But I have put it in there because it is for the endurance at higher gaits, cantering, galloping, for example. And breathing control, that is so important. You know this, but I explain why in the book. So then we go through the anatomy of equitation, again, more nerd notes. The picture on the left is to test your saddle's horizontal balance, because so many riders put the saddle up the horse's neck. Just to make sure the saddle's in the right place, because that's going to make it very difficult for you to organize your posture on if it isn't. And yeah, more about anatomy and how the picture on the right, top right, the green is compressive force on the spine, which the spine can withstand more load, more force than it can in flexion extension, lateral flexion extension, and rotation. The rotation only has a load value of about 10% of what the compression is. So you'll know why the spine has to be protected during exercise, and especially if there's weight involved against gravitational force. The spine's just not strong enough. And by the time you've injured it, the spine will have had a very good go at trying to keep the support up, so that by the time you get back pain or you feel like you can't move, then you've done a fair amount of injury, which needs rest and clinical input or intervention. So then I just wanted to illustrate how much ligament there is in the pelvis. And remember I said to you that has to be mobile in 3 dimensions? Well, it's quite easy to strain those ligaments and potentially for those ligaments to not be able to support the pelvis and upper body as well as it should. Then we've got how to make a template of your pelvic floor, which many of you will be familiar with by now. That's Maria Hallering's technique, Ergo X2 saddles from Sweden. Great contribution to saddle fitting and rider assessment. And then I have put some enhance the dance in there. So there's some separate tips. I like to correct the rotations. I think that is absolutely critical and it's such an easy win. I've just explained here how to do it. If you can't get a reading with the rider's thumbs on the hips, then you just get them to either sit in the saddle or sit on a saddle buck or stand and get them to look down at their thighs, and they'll be able to see instantly, one's more in advance of the other, therefore that hip on that side is the one that needs to be either contracted back or the one on the other side protracted forward, but there is more explanation there. And more enhance the dance because I like a good rib cage pelvic plant. And once you've seen this, you can't unsee it. If you get to look at a lot of riders or anyone really, and just looking, if you look at the rider on the top left on the right, you will see that they have got a very good connection between the rib cage and the pelvis and the thighs. The rib cage is not, if you see in the second picture, the rib cage is not drifting over the front of the pelvis. You can see how that would not help a rider. And again, we're looking at the fascial system and how that supports the rider. So with that, lumbodorsal fascia, the gluteal group, all these rider structures that can help riders to balance while astride on a moving horse and while they deal with the momentum that creates. Again, more theory, and especially about the core stability muscles and how easy it is for them to create asymmetry, create some aberrant rotation or some mild flexion extension, which you would not want to be subjected to force from the horse's movement. So there are exercises or techniques in here which do target those core stability muscles, which, if you can see, the spine is unsupported between the pelvis and the rib cage. And this is where we get the, as I just said, about the pelvis being more on one side, just being more in advance than the other. It's rotated, it's tilted, it's mildly flexed when it shouldn't be. So that's what that's about. Lots of nerd notes now coming up on the left, and the stability visualization technique. So I like to combine my rotational corrections with heavy thigh, and all this contributes to making the rider stable to within millimeters, and the horse just responds to that very, very well. The horse does not want an unstable load. And there's more of those, and many of those come from Mary Wanless, but I've been using them for decades. They really do work. So I apply my favorites. I've got a little technique here for behind the vertical. You see that over and over again, people critiquing behind the vertical. But again, in my experience, I've seen this as a rider stabilization problem or a horse weakness. It can be addressed, and it can be addressed with the rider stability. The weight reduction techniques, I will pass over those. So now we come on to the techniques. Again, lots more nerd notes about exercises. But at this phase, I have 24 techniques, and all of these are listed They go from minimal effort to much more effort over the 24 types or techniques. And I've also put some, if you can see top right, needs analysis in there. So I've referred back to the needs analysis chart. So what you can do is you can look down through the needs analysis and think to yourself, oh, I can see something with 6 that addresses 6 aspects of the needs analysis is a very good exercise to do. Or there may be something more specific, like, for example, number 4, which is a shoulder pull. Well, that's basically for realigning your posture and for stretching your shoulders back or addressing the stiffness, tightness in the shoulders. So you can put a plan together. If you say, I might have 5 minutes to do my exercises, that's fine. If I tell you you've got to do 30 minutes, it's a bit of a chore. But if you can do 5 minutes at 11 o'clock and another 5 at 2 o'clock, and you've selected these exercises which make complete sense to you because you can relate to them as needing them, then you will have great success at upselling your posture. So there's some more. And then I start going through these techniques. Now, the first technique, as I said earlier, is my absolute favorite. It just mobilizes the spine if it needs mobilizing. And I feel like I've been to an osteopath chiropractor when I get up off the floor and I get little popping sounds of my vertebrae just mobilizing and just normalizing. And everyone does react differently to this, but as I say, a rolled up towel, I'll post that just after this. I urge you to have a try at that, provided you can get on the floor and your back is not aching too much. And yeah, follow that up with standing up straight and just seeing where your spine or your posture cannot take a vertical stance. That's a good one. Neck retraction. And then I do move on to some weighted exercises. So it doesn't mean you can't do the exercise because you haven't got a weight. You can always find something around to help you. But the reason I advocate weights is you get resistance. The exercise can be done, or the technique, not the exercise, it can be done in 30 seconds rather than 2 or 3 minutes. So let's embrace that if it saves time, and you need to save time. Then there's a technique where I do a step, stretch and strengthen on a step. You can see in this photo I've got my ankle weights because the limb can drop further with a weight on it. You haven't got to be consciously pushing it. So this is why the ankle weights are useful. So I'm just going to show you this technique. So this is how easy I've made it for you. I've chosen easy, effective, low effort techniques. There's no need to get into a sweat till you get near the end of them. Okay, off we go. So just 28 seconds for this. There's no sound, no visual. You can read what I'm doing. This is simple. You can do it almost anywhere. You may need a pad for your knee. But as you can see, it stretches. If you watch carefully, it doesn't just stretch the ankle. It will stretch your quads, hamstrings, gluteals, adductors, and hip joints. Very gently, but it's still a stretch or an activation. So you can see there how my pelvis is moving, how my other leg, the adductor there, is moving or stretching, being activated and targeted. So this is a really good technique for that. And again, refer back to my list and my needs analysis. A lot of these exercises have at least 2 or more structures that they target. That's my horse behind me, by the way. So hold the stretch. 15 seconds, 5 repetitions, or hold for 15 seconds on 3 of the repetitions, because you will get 80% of the maximal stretch with just by doing 3 of those. So do 5 if you like, but 3 if you don't have time. So as I say, I've tried to make it very easy with minimal equipment. Standing hip joint mobilization, bottom right. Well, I prefer the seated one, but you can try this if you don't have a balance board to hand, or if you're waiting to get one. But I do prefer the seated version, which is the seated hip joint mobilizations. I consider that those should be done before you get on a horse, unless you're hypermobile in the hip joints, in which case you don't need to do it. But if you feel some sort of tightness, stiffness, provided you're not in pain doing this exercise, but you can work through some stiffnesses with this technique because you've got full control of that balance board. And it's also really good for finding out where the restrictions are, at what point in the move you're restricted, what side you're restricted. And when I have my riders do this exercise off the horse, they are astonished at how restricted they are or how asymmetrical they are. This one I'm showing you on top right on a machine, but it is a very, very good way to strengthen your back. As I said earlier, how are we going to get the back muscles strong, hypertrophied? That is really the best way to do it. But you can do it on a bed, but you may need to have to put your hands down. You could probably do it over a bale of shavings. And it is a very slight movement. It will give you a very fast track means of isolating the erector spinae and strengthening them without flexing and extending, because I'm actually hinged from the hip here. And it's the gluteals that do a lot of the work, and the fact that I'm hanging against the force of gravity that is making my back support itself against that. Then the more energetic ones, we've got the plyometric back and leg strengthening, which is great. You just jump up off a step, but you'd be surprised at how many takes that video took for me to actually land straight and not just go off to one side. So again, just showing all the weaknesses which I know that I've got on my left side. And lateral leaps, I love those because that can help you stabilize on a horse so that if you jump from side to side in a zigzag, then that should help you remain vertical while you're riding. So it will strengthen the side of your body. And then mirroring, that's a really good game. You do need another person for it though, but to actually get the reactivity trained. Obviously, when you're riding a horse, it is about reacting, not just to napping, but the focus of, especially if you're jumping, of staying with the horse. You can practice that with a partner, which you can't really practice it on the horse to that degree. So that's a really good technique there for that. And yeah, then the desker size dozen. So for those who are seated and like to remain seated and just really or not able to do exercise, then there are some good techniques there. And you can see side lunges, they will give you a big hit just by standing against the desk and lunging. But I have obviously got that earlier on in the text, but I use a weight with it. That is much better. It's much more equitation, rider specific, to lunge sideways, not forwards, because the forward lunge, you don't have to do it on a horse, unless of course you probably fall off frontways. But again, it doesn't mirror anything that you have to do, any skill on a horse. So do them sideways. Keep your back straight. So I'll just pass through these. And then I've described some exercise machines here, as I said earlier. I am using an inversion table for stretching at the moment, and that for my posture, very little else apart from my very first technique where I was lying on a roll, but this is a good follow-up to that. You don't need it, but I demonstrated it. it's there, the video's there for you to look at. But that is an amazing technique for your posture if you're struggling with it. And then I've had a go on one of these little balance devices, which was fun. You can use a squat resistance device. That's good. That's good. I found it hard work, but it's good. And one of these little dance gliding machines. They're quite rare, but if you do happen to see one, that really does replicate the movement that they need. And these are basically to a penny, these 360 gliding machines. Fantastic, because you can get a stride on them. It works your glutes. You can see which gluteal is very weak. In fact, I'm going to show you this. Again, no sound. So it trains gluteal muscle activation and hip joint mobility. And what you'll notice there, everyone that I put on this machine, they nearly always have one gluteal that activates before the other one. And it's really difficult to get them both activated at the same time. So I really do recommend this machine. Conscious effort. And there you go. And obviously I'm not leaning on the bars or using the bars. I'm only resting on them. Oops. And then the weakest leg starts to become the strongest one, because that's the one I'm focusing on. And I'm trying to activate the same, both together to the same degree. And 10 repetitions, yeah, that's quite a lot, but it takes you about that to get it figured out. And important to rest and then repeat for another couple of sets. But this machine is widely available on Facebook Marketplace. And I think, you know, if you do those daily, especially before you ride, and also it will help strengthen the gluteals a couple of times a week. And again, give you that gluteal cushioning, which will help to preserve your spine. That is the end of the presentation. And if you have any questions, just let me know. Thank you.